Welcome to another episode of Lattes and Art, presented by J Squared Atelier, the podcast where we explore the vibrant world of contemporary art and the creative minds behind it. I'm your host, James William Moore, and today we have a fantastic guest joining us, Roston Johnson. Roston is a talented mixed media artist and art instructor with a Master of Fine Art degree from San Jose State University and a bachelor's degree in graphic communications from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Known for his ability to transform the mundane into thought-provoking works, Roston's art is celebrated for its subversive, contradictory, and experimental qualities. His master's thesis, Generous Orthodoxy in Art, not only showcases his influences but also charts the compelling evolution of his work, advocating for moderation in the realm of fine art. Today, we're going to delve inside the mind of the artist as we discover Roston's creative process and how he challenges conventional norms in the art world. Grab your latte, let's get comfortable, and let's dive into this fascinating conversation. Today we're going to be talking with Roston, and he's coming in here because he has this amazing creative process. At least I think he does. And a lot of times we run into, where do we find inspiration? Thanks for being with us today, Roston. When you're looking for inspiration, where are you finding it?
I'm finding inspiration mostly from people, the people in my life, from conversations that I have with other people. Sometimes it's just a simple word or a phrase that leads me to an image in my head that I get sort of fixated on. But other times it comes from, songs or song lyrics, music, movies, TV, a YouTube video. Anything can sort of trigger that. I might be watching something or listening to something, and then that just kind of, I'll just sort of take it from there. My mind kind of wanders.
Now, you've looked at YouTube videos, you've used music, and you have a term that you associate to your practice, which is remix. What does that mean?
Remix is you're taking elements from that, retaining some of its elements, but you're putting your own kind of personal spin on it and making it your own. Usually to subvert it or to make it parody or a satire, you're appropriating that material to be used in some other way, but not like deterrent, not to undermine, something political.
Nothing wrong with undermining some politics. So when you're talking about this and you use the word appropriation, how are they different?
Appropriation, I think, is where you are taking that idea that already exists, say Michael Jackson's Bad album. Just looking at the album cover, have that in mind with Michael Jackson in the all, leather and stuff. And then Weird Al Yankovic released an album called Even Worse, which is a parody of that album by Michael Jackson, at least in terms of the cover, but some of those songs too, he remixes. So to remix is like the act of changing some of those elements of the original thing. I guess they really are more related than I think they are, appropriation and remix. Because I have heard them used sort of interchangeably. It seems like appropriation, you're borrowing those elements. Remix maybe could be the broader term to describe appropriation, satire, parody, etc., I think.
Is there a possibility, is if we remix something, right? And we know DJs that do this, and
right.
We all bop to the songs.
Right.
But is this possibly the next iteration of appropriation that kind of moves when we have that sort of inspiration, that we're looking at a Warhol or a Jeff Koons or something like this, and these people appropriate.
Right.
But is it a new term and it doesn't have the baggage that some find appropriation to have?
I think it's more like that, because for me, I think remix is more of a general, all-encompassing term to describe those other things, whereas appropriation seems to have more of a art vocabulary connotation or art school connotation, just in what I've seen, because Weird Al is also dressing up in the leather that Michael Jackson has, but he's doing it in kind of an ironic and in a subversive kind of way. it is a tribute in a sort of weird way, because that couldn't have possibly happened without Michael Jackson first producing that album Bad for Weird Al Yankovic to then borrow that same look, even with like the curly hair and stuff, the leather, to make his album even worse, which is worse than Bad. So, so it's got all those different layers to it.
Like, I appropriate.
Right.
Like, I own up to that big time. But I also say that it's campy and kitschy while I'm doing it. And that wouldn't be unlike what Weird Al has done in the past. And I think it's interesting because there is a lot of inspiration that we get as artists when we look at other artists. Right. But then there's this idea, well, you're stealing from them. And it's like, no. I don't feel I am. I feel I've been honoring the original. I'm changing it to be my own.
Right.
So in that vein, your remix, like, it plays into that. Mm-hmm. I think it gives us that chance that, you know, your, what was the Beatles that you did?
The White Space.
The White Space.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're riffing off of that. You're not ripping, but you're riffing.
Right.
It's that idea that you have incorporated this.
Right.
So when you're talking about inspiration and stuff, how much of it ends up being like from your own rituals or routine? Like, what is it that you do daily that turns into inspiration?
Yeah, inspiration can come from a number of those places. I mean, it sounds sort of cliche to say, but sometimes like a walk or a drive or something like that. I think when there's time to actually process what's been presented to you in daily life, when you have time to ruminate and think about it, then that's when at least I tend to make some of those connections between either seemingly different ideas, or to take that pre-existing idea and think about it another way, or to let my mind do with it what it wants to. You know, if I find some humorous element in something that already exists, or something contradictory or something kind of absurd about it.
It's one of these things that when, you know, we as artists are looking for stuff and we hit roadblocks, we have those moments that we're like, well, shit, I got no idea here.
Yeah. It's like the first 10 minutes of me talking here.
In reality, are we really blank with idea at that moment? Or are we just taking a pause?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think for me, I do need time to think, and to get kind of, you know, have things sorted out. If I feel like I'm, you know, under stress, or, you know, I have something else that's been like nagging away at me, other things going on in my life, that does kind of take away from the creative process. If I'm already happy and I start doing a painting or something, that'll make me even more happy. But if I'm already kind of like, you know, little depressed, a little down, then if I start getting into painting like that, those thoughts will still be on my mind when I'm working, and sometimes that can kind of upset the work.
How much of it's mental note taking for you versus writing this stuff down?
You mean like when you're actually making, or what
ideas, or even making, because there's a process, right? We can talk about that. But with ideas, like I'm, you know, it's funny, if I went to the exhibit that they had at the SF MoMA about Warhol, and my favorite part of the exhibit wasn't his actual artwork, but the recreation of his workspace that just looked like a jumbled mess. And I felt seen in that moment. It's like, oh, look, it's my studio. But then I started seeing all of these books and notes that he was taking and writing. And I'm looking at what I do, and I don't do that. I actually struggle with that. It's all up in my head.
Oh, okay.
So when you're dealing with, how do you keep track of all the ideas?
That's, yeah, okay, I'm with you now. Yeah, I have like a little journal, not a moleskin, but kind of the same idea. It's just lined paper inside a little booklet that wraps up nice. And I can even stick like other little papers and like, you know, reference things in there if I need to. It's just kind of a nice compact place to keep all that stuff. But then also sometimes if I just have like a piece of scratch paper laying around, I might pick that up and jot something down, or make a little doodle. My sketchbook too, because sometimes it's not just like drawings and stuff I'm doing. Sometimes I am just kind of recording my thoughts or writing down those ideas just so I have them somewhere, because I know if I don't write it down or I don't make some kind of a note or example of that idea, I'm going to lose it. So I kind of do have to do that for most things. There's not too many things that I can just like, I hear something or see something, I have the idea, I put the brush to the canvas. That doesn't happen very often for me. But in some cases, I will get an idea. I'll make like a drawing or maybe a couple drawings. Maybe, I might edit aspects of whatever it is I'm working on to work out the bugs. And then from there, I will say begin a painting. And then at many instances along the way of making this painting, I will improvise. There's no way for me to like stick to the original conception, because things do happen. I think there are moments when while you're working, you kind of get into a trance because it takes a lot of your concentration. And there becomes a point when you can kind of see everything all at once, and then you just kind of get into a state where you can just work without thinking consciously about each and every decision.
So you have your building blocks.
Yes.
But they're like Lego. You can unplug it and use it somewhere else,
Right.
or change the color of the block.
Right.
You're not so locked in to that original idea. It's just the thought.
Right. Because sometimes things do happen better. Actually, probably more of the time, things do turn out better when you're not like thinking about it. And that kind of, this might be a later topic, but that kind of gets into the idea of feedback from other people. Because if you're constantly worried about what you're making while you're making it, it can be really crippling.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it kind of was going down that, but it was along this lines: just fucking make the work. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about what everybody else is thinking. Make the work.
Yeah.
I want to jump back to these ideas, the music, the videos, that remixing. And as you're going through that, and as you're finding inspiration from it, how much of it's emotionally driven? Because we know when we listen to music, it spurs memories, it brings nostalgia, it does those sorts of things.
Yeah.
How does that work in your process?
Sometimes I guess I'm not like, I don't have the thought that's like, let's listen to this and maybe it'll give me an idea. It's music, I think, for me is a little bit more of a constant in my life. It's playing most of the time. And it's only at times that I will connect whatever I'm listening to or what I'm seeing to another experience that I had. Usually I'm able to find some connection to personal experience, I guess. But yeah, there are definitely songs that like I'll listen to and I have a sort of nostalgia for like that earlier time, or it does trigger a memory for me, and I'll tear up because it will move me in that way. Or maybe it's a song that's like, I don't know, some harder hitting song, not easy listening, not something that you want to like wake up to every morning.
Air Supply,
like Black Flag or something, like it's amazing music, but it's like not what I want to wake up to every morning, But it does sometimes take songs like that to get into a state where, you feel like there's been a fire lit under your ass or something, and you just have to like make shit or break shit sometimes. The White Space project that I did, the conception of it was there. The idea was there to do a remix of the Beatles' White Album, to create relief prints, woodblock prints that use the same format, but I remixed it to put my own personal spin that would reflect my attitude towards Brian O'Doherty's The White Cube, which is a critique of the sort of institutionalized gallery space as being this like vacuum that's cut off from the rest of the world and culture and doesn't necessarily reflect those things. It's kind of this other space that people have to go to in order to see what's in there. But when I was making the actual painting that eventually went into that gallery for that show, White Space, that was more spontaneous. I just thought, I'm going to play around. I'm going to see what I can do in this space once I've put all of the pieces of cardboard together into an 11 by 11 foot space. And my thought was to paint it all white with gesso, and then to get out the fucking 8-foot long paint roller and then just like start throwing shit everywhere and spiraling out kind of. And that was all to music. I think I was listening to the Brian Jonestown Massacre album, one of them. And I just kind of put that on a loop and then just went to town.
It's funny because I too am musically driven. Like when I'm in my studio, when I'm just wandering around the house, there's always music going on. And it's interesting, I'd rather hear music than the spoken word. And so in those moments, right, I'm like you said, there's these memories that these songs generate, because I tend to listen to the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, maybe not the best time in my life, but there's so much that then starts to inspire from that. I want to jump back for just a second, because you were talking about relief prints, and there's a process that you did, and I apologize that I'm forgetting what it's called, but where you were putting the papers down on textured objects and rubbing and doing that sort of thing. Can you talk me through that again?
Sure. That process is called frottage, which is where you take a sheet of paper or something similar like that you can draw on, that will capture whatever surface, raised surface that's underneath it. So say, for example, you have a sewer drain cover, a manhole cover that has a sort of texture on it. You would put a sheet of paper down, and then taking dry media, so like charcoal, pencil, colored pencil, Conti, that kind of thing. And then you just make a rubbing on top of the paper of that texture that's underneath. So it will pick up the raised surface, and all of the white areas are the recessed surface that we can't touch.
So what inspired you to go down that path?
Well, see, it all started back when I was a kid, back in Costa Rica. I took this study abroad trip with my printmaking instructor, Erin from SJSU. I got into frottage through printmaking when I went on this study abroad trip with my professor and a couple other grad students. And I saw my buddy Craig Sanborn was doing the same thing on the street in Costa Rica. I think we were in San Jose, and we were right near the University of Costa Rica, and there are sewer drain covers everywhere, which is a whole other thing. I mean, they're actually made in the U.S. They're made in Wabash, and then somehow they get back over to Costa Rica, and they use that for their water supply. So, aqueductos. And I saw Craig doing a rubbing for the first time, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. I want to give that a try. And I actually documented that. So we had gone to an art store in Costa Rica, and he had opened up his, couple of sheets of paper that he had got there and some pencils, and I think in this case he was using charcoal, and he just laid a sheet down, and then Ian Fabre was holding one part of it down because it was a larger sheet, just to keep it steady while Craig was making the rubbing, so he could get a good pull from it or a good image from it. And then Mark was kind of standing by, and I took a photo of that whole scene of that activity, and then I later went on and I made a print and then a painting of that same instance. So it's like art mimicking life, mimicking art, mimicking life, mimicking.
But it still plays into your ideas and your inspirations of remixing.
Yes, absolutely. And so remix, I guess, it's not just that you're taking other people's stuff. You actually, remix can apply to your own work too. You can remix your own art objects, which I do. Because sometimes I'm either not satisfied with the first thing I made, or I will have other ideas that make it possible to expand on the first idea.
Well, and it's interesting too because you're in that moment, right? And somebody's doing something and you start to experiment and it now morphs into this bigger idea and bigger inspiration that's taking you down another path, which kind of gets back to this idea too that although we have those moments that we don't feel inspired, we still have these paths that we've kind of built for ourselves.
Yeah.
When you are in that instance where you saw this all going on and everybody else is doing it or that sort of thing, what inspires you in that moment to make it your own?
Well, if I find some connection with, another experience I had in life, or I think in that particular instance, I just thought, oh, what a great visual record I could make in my sketchbook that will sort of document my travels here. Because after I saw the act and then I gave it a try, the act, after performing the act, I realized I could just keep adding more of these frottages, these rubbings to my sketchbook. And by the end of the trip, I think I had like 30 different pages filled with these rubbings that I had made, just from all of these different points of all these different textures that had some connection to an experience that I had when I went to Costa Rica. And then when I came home, I was looking at the sewer drain covers here and, other shit that I wanted to rub.
Well, and it's, I remember when you came back from that trip and you were sharing all of that with me, and there was this excitement that you had from this discovery, this sort of inspired playtime.
Yeah, it was definitely a way to a document, a way to document those experiences. So I would say, yeah, big correlation between doing that act as a way to learn and as a way to kind of preserve that memory in a different kind of way.
Earlier, you talked about feedback, like, when you share your work and you talk about it, and, we've sat in on critiques together. And what inspiration actually comes out of that for you?
From the actual feedback,
yeah,
it really depends on the context of the work that I was showing, who was there during that critique to give the feedback, because it's not always the same people. I mean, I know when you and I have been in critique, it has been a lot of the same voices, probably even more so for you because you've been in a lot of those photo major only critiques, so you're hearing like all the same voices all the time, which is why you had gone into the interdisciplinary critique to get a wider range of voices, a wider range of feedback, rather than hearing the same old thing about your work. So I'm actually more interested in that as well, getting the wider range. I think there are times in a group setting of critique, you get a certain kind of feedback. When it's one-on-one, I actually appreciate that a little bit more. Those asides that you have with people, like they come to your show, they look at your work, and then kind of off to the side in like one corner of the gallery, they just start kind of talking to you about the work, things that they liked or things they noticed, or maybe just something as simple as, have you considered this, or that kind of thing. And in some ways that actually speaks to me more. I'm able to retain that a little bit more. I feel like in the group, bigger, broader critiques, that kind of feedback feels a little bit more general.
Well, and you and I had a chance to be in Susan Harding's gallery when she had her portrait show up, that she was doing this interdisciplinary photography, drawing, sketching, collaging. And I agree with you. I like when we have that sort of one-on-one back and forth, because you've created something and you want feedback. And in the group setting, sometimes it's everyone kissing your ass. Sometimes it's like, okay, I know this individual and I really don't actually respect what they're saying. And so there are those moments. But when we're in those intimate one-on-ones, or, in that case, there was the three of us that were chatting, there's these amazing conversations that happen. And you can walk away from it and say, okay, I can edit what I did. I can leave it as it is. Or I can be inspired by what they've said. And in those instances where you've had that kind of thing, where does that take you?
I guess it really does depend on the context. I really do think context is a big part of it, because you would make a different decision based on different feedback with a different person for a different thing. And my and my work is so like sporadic. I'm kind of all over the place because I'm interested in a lot of different things. There's a lot of contradictions, and there's a lot of experimentation, and some subversion. And so the feedback that I get, I'm not looking to offend anybody. I mean, it's kind of like a prank. A good prank is not something that is offensive. It's something that that everyone can actually laugh from. It's like, it's a jest. It's a joke. I'm not being serious. But if I'm doing something that actually does offend someone, in a not okay way, I would want to know that, because I'm not trying to diss anybody. I'm not about that.
That's my job.
Yeah. So
it's interesting because, we went through grad school together, and we sat in on those critiques, and we sat in on studio visits, and we did that sort of thing. How do you feel for someone who's not in grad school can find that sort of feedback to help inspire them?
Oh, yeah. That's actually kind of an interesting idea, just the way that you put that, because at the present time, I'm not really looking for feedback as a means to inspire me. Presently, I have ideas for things that I want to make, and so I want to make those things first before I get any feedback.
The idea of inspiration, and how right now you're not looking for that feedback because you have these ideas. Mm-hmm. How do you keep on track once you get what keeps you inspired?
Just continuing to make, if it feels like, that's what I want to do at the time. I know that when I had first graduated, I took a long break from any kind of art making. I wasn't drawing, I wasn't painting for at least 8 or 10 weeks after finishing school. I was mowing lawns and painting houses and painting fences. I took off the grad school cap and I put on the Tom Sawyer cap. So that was like, I kind of needed that to detox from all of the grad school conversations and critique and study of art. I guess at the present, I don't feel obligated to make things right now, but I do have ideas for things that I want to make. And when I do get those ideas, I do write them down, and I do make drawings and stuff like that. But I don't feel the obligation to make it a continuous thing, to have it be a continuous thing.
Your process when you were becoming an artist, how has that changed? And how has that process changed how you're inspired to find things to do?
Before grad school,
Yeah, way back. Because you were an artist long before grad school. Grad school is just this moment in time. But you, clearly, you taught me how to draw, which is like, you get sainthood for that one. But, we were artists. I've had a camera in my hand since I was 4 years old. But you had process before that, and you had inspirations before that. How has that changed?
Yeah, big time.
Or has it?
No, it definitely has. I don't make art the same way now that I did then. I wasn't making art the same way during grad school that I had been making it before. Because before grad school, before I became a fine art major, before I was studying art in school, there was definitely a big span of my life, even when I was in my undergrad studies, that I didn't even know, I didn't think that having a career in art would even be possible. But like you, I had early experiences in drawing, in my case, from like 3 or 4 when I could hold a pencil in my hands, and I just started making little doodles. My parents still have like a box somewhere of like all the early drawings and things I did, with like the big eyes and noses and ears and huge head on a little teeny tiny body, that kind of thing. And then from there, I think I had like little art activities in school. Like sometimes there might be like a visiting artist, or there'd be like a school assembly, and an artist would visit, and then it would be a kind of, they do something and then I do something. They show us a art technique and then we would try and follow along. Calvin and Hobbes was big for at my school. Some kid had brought like a bunch of those comics to class one day, and so during the downtimes in class and during recess, myself and some of the other kids would be looking through these books. And there was a point when I switched over to Microsoft Paint as a mode of expression, the early pixel art, and I was making these little penguin comics, kind of based on what I had seen in Calvin and Hobbes. And this was like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, so pretty young. But already I was kind of, experimenting, learning, teaching myself these other methods of making. And so I didn't put it together then, but I'm putting it together now, that those early childhood experiences of making art and then also experimenting with media, I think eventually informed what I'm doing now. Not necessarily feeling like I have to stick with drawing or painting, that I can take photos too, or I can use digital processes as a way to mediate what I'm doing, or just to use some of those, say, digital tools to work things out in ways that I might not necessarily be able to with a pen or pencil. But somehow the editor-in-chief from the school newspaper got a hold of what I was doing, and she said that she really liked what I was doing, and she and a few other editors were there. They offered me a job as the staff illustrator, as the staff cartoonist for the school newspaper. And it was at that point, that was the first time in my life I had ever been offered a professional opportunity to publish something that would be seen by the public. I think that was kind of the first seed that was planted for me that made it feel like, a career in art is possible. It may not be the life of the rich and famous necessarily, but it is possible to do art in some form for some kind of return.
When you were in that role, how did you find inspiration and not get burnt out?
That was a really good time in my life to just experiment. I felt like they gave me the reins. Shame on them. I was I was paired up with the opinion section of the school newspaper, and so they had free rein to write about whatever they wanted. Either it would be the author, or it was the editor of the opinion section of who would say such and such is writing an article, it's about this, and they just kind of give me a general idea, maybe a topic in like 1 or 2 sentences, but I had never really read those articles. They just kind of told me generally what it was about. Based on that little scoop, I would have free rein to draw whatever I wanted to. So kind of amoral to give that much freedom to a 21-year-old student who was inspired by like underground comics and Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts and shit to then, because that was kind of the first sorts of things that I was making. I really didn't get into actual painting until later on. I would say drawing and cartooning were things that I knew before I got into academic art that gave me my start.
A word that you've used several times through this conversation has been experiment. And I, as someone who has watched you create, experiment is probably the best way to describe what it is that you do. How can you guide someone else in that experimentation? What is it about experimenting is motivational? What is it that gives us those new ideas and inspiration?
I think to experiment, there's a lot more freedom in experimentation than there is in study and practice. There comes a point, I think, when you can study and practice for so long, but you're not really opening up yourself to the possibility of new ideas. You're kind of closing yourself off to outside the box ideas because you don't necessarily know what's possible. I think the way to go beyond what we know is to reach into territory that's sort of unknown. And the way to get there, I think, is through experimenting with content and form, media, etc. So I use the word experiment with regard to my practice because I don't necessarily want to be nailed down by anything. It's cool when people can see common threads in my work. That's fine. I think as far as allowing me to experience as much freedom as possible when I'm making art, I try to avoid coming to conclusions about my work. I guess I have to kind of know a little bit to be able to explain it to other people. like what do you do? Oh, just little of this, little of that, or some shit. And but really, because I have so many interests and because I don't want to do like the same old thing over and over in the same way, that allows me to experiment pretty easily if I'm always switching up the materials or the way that I'm making things. This was one of the biggest takeaways creatively, I think, that I had in grad school. First, make a painting that in a way that you're comfortable with making, in a way that you're used to making. And then the second painting that you do is going to be a complete 180. You want to make a painting in ways and possibly with materials that you're hesitant to or that you're afraid to. And it's going to be frustrating at first, most likely. It has the potential to open doors that probably wouldn't have been possible otherwise, because you're kind of forcing yourself to work in ways that are kind of counterintuitive, maybe. Say you prefer traditional methods, like I'm going to prep and prime and stretch a canvas, I'm going to use brushes, I'm going to do oil paint, I'm going to make a very traditional, say, landscape painting. And then for the 180 for the second painting, and you do a person, and because it's not a landscape, and then you're going to do it all from memory. You're not going to use any kind of reference, and then instead of brushes, you're going to use your hands and your fingers, and instead of oil paint, you're going to use, like, I don't know, coffee grounds or something. You're making all of these decisions that go counter to what you were told in school is the right way to approach something, because it's going to open you up to new ideas. That was really helpful advice for me at the time, because through those moments of working in ways that I was hesitant to, it actually did open up some doors for me and showed me what was possible.
Well, and it kind of gets back to my motto that, there are no rules in art, right? School gives us structure, usually. And very seldom do they want you outside that structure because that's uncomfortable for the institution. As we wrap this up today, we've talked about inspiration, we've talked about where you find it and your creative process. What final thoughts can you leave with someone who may be struggling with that, as where to look, what to do, what to try?
For inspiration,
for being creative, to get them out of that sort of negative headspace, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there are different methods for kind of getting out of your head. I mean, sometimes you just have to start making things and not think about it, because, like I said, if you're thinking about every conscious decision while you're making the work, that can be a hindrance. That can prevent you from the potential in that object. And I think it also depends on the person too. Not all artists work the same. We're shaped by different forces. We're all different people. We all have different tendencies. We come from different walks of life. So the way that I make something is different than the way that you make something or approach something. But I would say there are methods that you could use that would inspire. There's free association making. There's what's called free association writing, which is where you just put pen to paper and you just start writing shit, not thinking about what you're writing, but just getting something down on paper. sort of like stream of consciousness. You could care less what is actually coming out of the pen. You just want to get something down. It's whatever just happens to be swirling around in your head. You can do the same thing with drawing. Don't even think about what you're drawing. Just put the pencil to paper and just see what comes out. So you can do stuff like that, which can start a piece and then kind of see what it turns into. I think just being receptive to what's going on in your life, the way that you're feeling, others around you, not necessarily through media. I mean, I know we can use those as a way to get inspiration, movies, music, books, things like that. I would say just be open to those experiences and really start to look and listen at the things and the people in your life around you. And then just start making. Don't even think about it. It's easier to make it first and then to think about it later, not the other way around.
I think your statement of getting out of your head is like that first moment.
Yeah. Some kind of momentum.
Yeah. And then I think you gave us all of those things that help support us to get out of our head, right? Just create, just write, just do something.
Just do something.
Just do something. Mm-hmm. Roston, thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation on the creative process that you go through. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Lattes and Art, presented by Jauregui. It's been a pleasure speaking with Roston Johnson about his creative journey and the fascinating ideas behind his work. We hope you enjoyed learning more about his artistic process and insights into the world of contemporary art. If you want to see more of Roston's incredible artwork and stay updated on his latest projects, be sure to follow him on Instagram at RostonLikeBoston. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Lattes and Art wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, keep creating, keep inspiring, and keep sipping those lattes.